All right, so we've got, why does the U.S. administration broker a peace settlement in Gaza that favors Iran? I do not know. I don't think that is the normal view of it, but I'm not going to claim to be anything like an expert there. The I mean, I do subscribe to the usual view that the peace settlement, or again, like the ceasefire, is not going to hold. And so, as for it favoring Iran, if it happens, the obvious story is it's not really expected to continue. So it might favor Iran in the very unlikely case that it works, but otherwise won't. So that's the best that I'll do there. Let's see. Other questions. Um, why was there no recession in 2024 as many libertarians predicted? Yeah, so, I mean, I'd say that's a more general question because this is a period of disinflation. There's a long view in macro that any disinflation actually is going to give you a serious increase in unemployment. So I wouldn't think of this as even a particularly libertarian view. I'd say that actually almost anyone who learned their macroeconomics in the 70s and 80s should be a bit puzzled by how you can get a serious disinflation without having a recession. Uh, I think probably the best story there is that your previous experiences with these disinflations come when the inflation has been long lasting, and people have really gotten used to there being high inflation and start automatically putting in cost of living adjustments into wage contracts and other business arrangements. And when you are not yet used to inflation, it's probably easier to have a disinflation without such high costs because people have not yet made the entire economy revolve around trying to uh, get around the problems of inflation. So that I think is probably the best story. Let's see. Now, what are your thoughts on dating someone with very different political viewpoints? Yeah, good question. I would say that if you both care about the issues a lot, then you shouldn't date. If you already are dating, then hopefully you've got enough other great things going on that you don't need to break up after hearing this. I'd say, I think it can be fine if you have one person who cares and another person who's apolitical. And you can be apolitical while having a political view. It's just that that's officially your view, but you don't actually care very much and you don't think about it, you don't talk about it. Then I think it can work. But if you have two people who actually are serious about their political views, who want to talk about them a lot, then I think it's going to be very hard to harmoniously coexist. Uh, Robin Hanson will probably say, "Oh, for many people, it's the struggle. It's just so exciting." Like, yeah, I mean, even if it's exciting for a little while, for anything long term, it just sounds like hell to me. So I would definitely not recommend it. If you're to say, well, what are you supposed to do when there is such a big political gap between the genders as there is today, and it's grown to levels that are really quite shocking when you just look at polling numbers, I'd still say what saves you is most people are apolitical. And actually, based upon a lot of other evidence, women are especially apolitical. If all the women you know are political, you are around a highly unrepresentative group of women. And in fact, women in general don't care very much about politics. I mean, most people in general don't care. Women care even less on average. That's why, on test of political knowledge, women do even worse than men do on average. It's why whenever you see people who are engaged in actual political arguments, it's almost overwhelmingly dominated by men. Men are almost the only people that want to go and have actual political arguments. You'll see it very common. And even on left wing websites, never mind other ones, you'll still see that as long as it's some kind of political argumentation, that 90% men is low. So you might say this is depressing, but it's not so depressing. It's like, look, just find, if you can't find people that you are politically harmonious with, at least find people that don't care. I remember I once had a friend who was sufficiently Jewish that he said, look, I don't care if my wife is Jewish, but she can't be anything else. All right. And it's like, what does that mean? Well, so either she's got to be Jewish and agree with me, or she can be anything else, but just not give a damn. And I think that is probably the best way to approach this. All right. So, what prediction would you be ready to bet about just now? Hmm. Let's see. Things that are people are talking about soon. I think I'll come back to that one. If something pops into my head, I will share. There's no bet that I'm really itching to make. I would say that I am super happy to go and make a bunch more end of the world bets like I have with Eliezer Zukowski. Our particular bet is humanity swiped off the face of the earth by January 1st, 2030. I still totally ready to bet a pile of money on that. And yes, if you do seriously believe in the end of the world scenario, you should be maxing out your credit card and betting me so that you can go and enjoy life now. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Um, Richard Nenny asked me to invite him up for a second to see if it's possible to join on desktop. All right, Richard, let's see. So I think I do. What do I do actually? Okay, people. People. Press the people thing. And what do I do? Okay. There we go. Okay. All right, seeing whether Richard's coming in. Okay. Um, all right, so I don't know what's happening, Richard, but I'll just move on. Could you make a full-throated argument for why citizens of a town do not have the right to control the look and feel of their town regarding housing regulation? I mean, honestly, it's the same as why don't the citizens of a town have the right to decide what religion you can practice in the town? Why don't they have the right to decide who can marry who in the town? Why don't they have the right to decide whether or not you can have kids in the town? I'll start with, well, that's the kind of thing where unless you actually agreed that this was something they could decide, then they don't have the right to decide it. And then, okay, well, why haven't you agreed by virtue of living in the town? You can go and read the standard history of social contract theory, a basic idea. Well, contracts are normally only binding for people who actually personally consent. 51% of people agreeing to be in a contract only means that those 51% have agreed. It doesn't bind the 49% to do anything. Then there are the standard responses. Well, there's implied consent. You can go and read Michael Humer's Problem of Political Authority and find out that the issues of implied consent, the main one being that if you explicitly don't consent, then that always overrules implied consent. And the same thing goes with the other save, which is hypothetical consent, which is you would agree on if you could. And again, if so, that's a case where if you don't have a shirt on saying you may resuscitate me in the event of a heart attack, you might say, well, I think this guy would have agreed if only he had thought that he was going to have a heart attack today. But if you have the shirt saying, in event of heart attack, definitely do not resuscitate me, that's a case where explicit non-consent vitiates hypothetical consent, and so then you don't. So that would be the main one of saying, look, a contract only binds people that personally participate. Social contract theory, while theoretically possible, it's just factually true that in any important polity, people have in fact signed a contract, nor do implied consent nor hypothetical consent save it. So that would be my story. If you want to just be consequentialist about it, I would say let's just go and look and see what actually happens in places where the town can or can't decide. I'd say the main result is that when the town decides, it just winds up strangling housing and is bad. And so it would have been better if you didn't have it. What's the difference between a town and an HOA? First of all, of course, an HOA does satisfy the usual requirement of unanimity. And then, second of all, just by virtue of it's so hard, really hard to get a lot of people to all agree to something, then we have this big benefit, which is there's an option. So there's some places that will have the rules, some won't. Whereas when you have entire towns doing it, then it's quite hard to get out of it. So again, that would be the consequentialist argument. And it looks like Richard's experiment has failed, so I'll cancel that. All right. Why is there so much anti-Indian racism on the right now? It seems relatively new phenomenon, like rising venomously in the past year or so. Say almost like just the past couple of months. I think this is so. First of all, it's likely there's been a let's back up. So first of all, there's the question of how much is there in real life versus the internet. Say in real life, I don't think that there is much of any. I am in a lot of circles where there's a lot of Indians around, and there's a lot of opportunities behind closed doors to go and badmouth Indians, and I've never heard anyone do it. Um, and by the way, so same thing with anti-Jewish hate as well. Most people do not know. Almost all Jews know that Kaplan is a Jewish name. Almost no Gentiles know that Kaplan is a Jewish name. Um, you may find this hard to believe, but there have been a lot of cases where people had no idea I was Jewish, so they would have had their chance privately to voice their anti-Semitic feelings, and this has basically never happened. So I think it basically doesn't. Selection bias, there's some selection bias, but uh, I actually do know a bunch of normal people too. I'm not completely in my bubble, despite what you might think. Let's see now in terms of, there could be a lot on the internet does not mean there's a lot in real life. So, what's going on with the internet there? You have a chance for some of the most unpleasant people in the world to all feed off of each other and troll, as the saying goes. So once one person sticks his neck out and starts bad mouthing Indians, this is a chance for a whole lot of other horribly unpleasant people to start doing it as well. In terms of like why now, I think it probably has a lot to do with Trump, right? So and in particular that debate that Elon was having about high school immigration. So this is a chance for people who are really anti-immigration say, "Hey, you think that high-skilled Indians are okay? Well, let me tell you, they're terrible and they got to be stopped." And then Elon went and argued with them, and a bunch of people were able to come out of the woodwork. Uh, Honestly, if you are an Indian immigrant in the U.S. or any other Western country, don't think that these unpleasant people speak for anyone but themselves. I think they are a very rare group, and I think Indians are very well liked overall, and with good reason. I had a great trip to India and great hospitality. And like I said, coming back, a lot of things wrong with India, but it's not really the Indians. I think there's very few people that I saw there who couldn't easily show up in the U.S. and be working next week. Let's see. What do you think we end up from a tariffs perspective by the end of 2025? Yeah. It's one where the world has gotten so strange that I hesitate to say. Ultimately, I'm always going to go back to base rates, but I'm going less to base rates than I normally would. So, Trump's first term, he did make a lot of noise about protection and then generally wound up just negotiating a very slight difference. This time, I'd say I'd give it 30% chance that it actually is something quite different, and we really do wind up having 25% tariffs on a number of major trading partners that last a while. Uh, so, yeah, I'd say so. 70% chance. I think things are basically going to settle down and be back within 5 percentage points of tariff from what they were in late Biden. 30% that we actually do get some durably high tariffs. So that's where I would go. Let's see here. Trump's planning to offer green cards for 5 million. Isn't that progress of a kind? If you can do it for 5 million, somebody else can do it for five. I'm sympathetic to that, although my understanding is that the plan is to get rid of existing H-1Bs and replace it with the $5 million one. Or actually, no, I take that back. I think the plan is to get rid of the existing investor visa, which is roughly $1 million to get in, and then you have to do a business, and then this is $5 million cash. Right? There is the standard economist advantage of it's better to go and let people just buy something than require them to go and start a business. And when you require people to start a business, like, yeah, maybe they'll just start a fake business in order to get through the rules. But that multiple is so high that if we had to give up the existing investor visa to switch over to this, say, look, if it were a matter of 50% more cash, then I think that's reasonable. But 5 times as much, I think it is actually going to lead to a lot less immigration. Will it lead to pressure to cut it? So far, the investor visa has not actually been cut. There are some exceptions where you can get in for less and like a distressed area and things like that. But uh, I mean, my understanding is Trump doesn't have any authority to even do this anyway. So courts would stop it. And then it's like, well, but would his own Supreme Court stop it? My guess is still yes. But I'll definitely say 15% chance that just allowing immigration permits to be sold for any price does gradually lead them to be available at a much lower price, and I think that would be a huge gain. 5 million is so high that very few people on Earth would actually get a $5 million gain from permanently relocating to the U.S. We get it down to 1 million even though. Combine that with usual credit markets, then there are a lot of mid-skilled people on Earth who really would make $1 million extra in present value from being here, as long as they come here when they're young. So if we could get it down to like $200,000, then I think that's one where even farmers would be able to get a loan to pay it off, and then that would be a huge improvement. All right, let's see here. Do I have a chance to win a Nobel Prize? Greater than zero, yeah, but really low. Like I'd say, like, is it is it even less than just average for all economics professors? I have to think that it is. I've got way more citations, way more work that people have talked about, but my political views are so unpopular. And if you think that political views don't matter for the Nobel Prize, you are very naive. Buchanan and Tulloch, two of my colleagues, they were very close collaborators, but Buchanan was hanging out in Sweden all the time making friends, and Tulloch was always happy to share his strange sense of humor with anyone on earth. And as a result, Buchanan won and Tulloch didn't, even though most of the stuff that the Nobel Prize cited was co authored with Tulloch. So, yeah, politicking matters, whether you are ideologically in sync. Uh, so yeah, I think that my chances are very poor. And then also, I think there's almost no examples of it going to someone who was not actually teaching at a top school. There's Emily Oster, so she was in Indiana, and then Ed Prescott, so he was at Arizona State, but he was still known to be at University of Minnesota, which is much more highly ranked. So the fact that I have a PhD from Princeton, I think, also is nowhere near enough. I need to have a lot more conventional status, as well as have political views more in sync, as well as have a lot more citations. So I'm not going to win it, but like honestly, like just to have a job where I can do this is so incredible. Like in like at no point do I ever feel sorry for myself in terms of the job that I got. It's just so much better than I imagined, and I thought it was going to be great. This is just an amazing gig if you can get it. If you're wondering, how can I get it? Jason Brennan's book, Nice Work If You Can Get It, that or Good Work If You Can Get It. I think it's Nice Work. Anyway, that book is a fantastic how-to guide about how to become a professor. I was just talking with this about this to Tyler Cowen the other day. I guess yesterday, in fact. So yes, it is reasonable to think that it's going to be harder to become a professor in the future. Even so, as long as you're in a field like econ, where there's a lot of fallback options and a lot of other competing occupations, I think it's not going to be that hard to get a job in econ, and I think the pay and working conditions will remain fantastic. Uh, I'm, like, am I worried like in 30 years the wokeness will be so bad that they'll just strip me of tenure? Right? Like 2% chance. It's a very tiny worry. I mean, honestly, people that don't like you usually aren't aware you're alive, so that's an extra strange kind of protection that you get. All right, other questions. How did your AI comic book experiment turn out? Did it change your view on the state future of AI? Like, here's the truth. I did two very similar contests, one pre-AI, one post, and the pre-AI ones were much better with much less money. So the post-AI ones spent a lot more money, generously donated by the great Steve Kuhn, and they were worse. It's just one experiment. It's one experiment, but it is a contest. So I was hoping that it really would show what was possible, and it wasn't very impressive. I have heard a few people say that there's recent developments, and now the problem of character constancy has been handled better. So that is one of the main issues with doing AI is you want to have a constant character appear in different panels. I am optimistic that in 10 years I'll be able to do professional work without an artist. Um, so hopefully. All right. Let's see. In hindsight, was Tyler right that high prevalence of immigration induces backlash? Was thrown merely the fact that immigration was illegal and unfiltered? Yeah. Uh, so I don't think Tyler was right about anything there. I don't think it's even possible to be right because he is so unwilling to even explain what he means by backlash. So if you use a word and you refuse to really explain it, then I'm not going to give you credit no matter what happens. That's just my line in the sand. First, explain clearly what we're talking about. What's my challenge for Tyler? I say, look, I want you to go and say, how is backlash different from and more severe than mere resistance? I have always expected that immigration would meet resistance. If you have immigration, there's going to be a bunch of people complaining about it and trying to stop it. Like, duh. All right. But if backlash is going to mean anything, it's got to mean that by pushing for more, you get less. This Laffer curve idea that if you had just toned down your demands, you would have gotten more. Right. And that I am still waiting around for any evidence that it's really happened. Uh, Brexit seemed like it would, and then immigration went up after Brexit. Really did. Look at the numbers. Composition changed, but you can say, oh well, because of high immigration, Brexit passes, and then they're going to really crack down on immigration, and then they didn't. All right, now there's some new immigration policy, but anyway, like I'll wait and see. But if even the original Brexit, followed by conservative governments, didn't lead to even a fall in immigration, much less a big fall, then I'm going to say that is not a good example of backlash. And then for the U.S., again, the question is, so I expect that immigration will go down under Trump, but will it actually mean that total immigration in, say, 10 years is less than if it had been kept at half its previous level for 30 years? And I think that's super unlikely, right? I just think it's really hard for the math to work out, and Democrats will eventually get back in power. The only scenario where I would be worried is if the Republicans were able to permanently change U.S. immigration law and replace the 1965 Act with something that is much more restrictive. I think that's super unlikely because it would have to go through a filibuster. And also, even without the filibuster, you have my favorite Republicans, the pro business Republicans, people who represent districts where some of their important constituents rely heavily upon illegal immigrant labor, and they do not want to go and have the farming and hospitality industries devastated. So I don't think there's going to be any fundamental change in U.S. immigration law. Given how strange things are, I'll go up to 25% chance of that, but I still think that it's quite unlikely. So yeah, so Tyler, not only, I mean, I'll put what he said in the not even wrong category because he's just so stubborn about refusing to say what he means. Okay. Uh, Now, this other thing about the problem merely being that immigration was illegal and unfiltered. Just to back up, we have a number of pieces that look at what is the correlation between objective fact and public perception. And the answer is it's real low. What does that mean? It means that if you were to go and have the border operating very nicely and orderly, that does not in any way mean that is likely you will convince people that is so. And on the other hand, things could be actually really chaotic and does not mean that will convince people they're chaotic. Um, that is like, well, what about the news? Yeah, the news is capable of showing anything under any circumstances without lying because it's a huge world. So you could just go to wherever the worst problem is and film that and then make it act like that's reality, right? And it's not. So in general, I'd say that trying to go and change opinion by changing facts is one of the hardest ways to change facts or to change opinions. How do you do it? Yeah, with rhetoric, with personality, and that's what actually works. And you can look at Trump. In some sense, he's a master rhetoric, and his personality is very appealing to a large number of people, though not me. And he just talks and makes stuff up and is convincing to people. And the key thing is he is not an anomaly. That's normal politics at a slightly more egregious level. All right. Let's see. In order to avoid confirmation bias, who is the best pro-welfare, pro-regulation, free market economist to read? Stiglitz, Krugman, Spigen, or someone else? Out of those three, absolutely Krugman. Krugman is a brilliant man. I will never say anything otherwise. He's very smart. And especially his early works, he's also generally very fair. You might even say, if you read his early works, you say, well, he isn't really even an anti-regulation economist. He was a very vocal critic of European labor market regulation. He has a lot of other areas of regulation he's critical of. He has mostly just stopped repeating what he said before, but I don't believe he's ever recanted anything. He still knows that stuff is right. He just doesn't want to talk about it. It's what Hanenya calls audience capture. And now, so Krugman's audience is now so left-wing that he doesn't want to tell them what they don't want to hear. But Krugman is really good on that count. Let's see. Other people, I would say I just personally like Jason Furman more and think that he is much more fair-minded than Krugman. There's no audience capture with Jason Furman. I'm pro Furman. You can see this piece that he recently wrote in either Foreign Policy or Foreign Affairs on what was wrong with Bidenomics. He is trying to go and do in reach on fellow left wing economists, but he still told them a lot of stuff they didn't want to hear. So Jason's good. And who else do I like? Let's see. My Econ 1 teacher, Bill Dickens, stopped talking to me in 2016 for mysterious reasons, but that in no way changed my view that he's a brilliant guy. And I had a lot of great discussions with him about these issues. So he hasn't written for a popular audience, really. So, but if you go to my Substack and just put in Dickens, you can learn about some of his work, which I think he just did some really good stuff and changed my mind. Let's see. All right, other people. Really like open borders. Wonder if you think about the capacity of democracy together open borders. See political landscape is seriously shaken with a much, much more limited immigration than we have now. Yeah. Well, so the U.S. was a democracy in the 19th century and 18th century, and we had nearly open borders then. So it's possible. You might have seen a piece on my Substack called "How Open Borders Died in Six Countries," where I went over a paper on U.S., Canada, UK, Argentina, Brazil, and Australia, I think, and it went through how all of them went from very open immigration to very closed immigration. I don't think any of them went from being democracies to dictatorships or vice versa. So you can totally have it. And I'd also say countries in the EU, they're democracies and they open their borders with each other, which is a much bigger accomplishment than it might seem because GDP of like France relative to Romania when they first opened is pretty similar to the US relative to Mexico. Right? And if you can imagine the US opening in Mexico, it's like, yeah, wow, that would be huge. So what already happened in the EU was huge. In terms of the political landscape being seriously shaken with much, much more limited immigration, so I would say this has a lot more to do with people are good at rhetoric than the actual numbers. I think you could just as easily have had the same anti-immigration movements if we had had half the immigrants or a quarter of the immigrants. As long as there's enough that people can see them and then people can complain, that's all it really takes. I mean, note, so Poland and Hungary before, during the, before the Ukraine war, they managed to get two very anti-immigration parties elected in countries with almost no immigrants. Right? How is that possible? It's like because they watch TV and they read newspapers and they hear, oh, there's immigration in Germany, so we got to go. So we got to go and protect Poland and Hungary. That's all it really takes. There's got to be something somewhere on Earth. So I just don't see that objective facts matter very much for public opinion, one way or the other. See, what do you think about the idea that libertarianism is just the aristocracy, people with high self-control? Yeah, I think that's it's one of the one. It's definitely a more original story. I don't think that it's true. You can obviously, if you actually hang out at libertarian conventions and things, you'll see that there are a lot of people there. A lot of libertarians obviously have very poor self control. You've got, of course, traditionally just heavy marijuana use. Now it seems like there's a lot of use of psychedelics. And then you will meet a whole bunch of people who don't seem to be able to hold down, or they do not hold down regular jobs. So, in terms of is it a view that appeals to people with high self control? Just based upon meeting random libertarians, I've met thousands, say probably it's below average, definitely below average for education and IQ. In terms of the major things the government does, and whether it has anything to do with self control. So, in the book I'm working on right now, Unbeatable, the brutally honest case for free markets, the big government policies that I say are that that exist, that are bad, that are dramatically changing what our society looks like. So we got immigration restrictions. I think that's very little to do with self control. We've got universal redistribution, where you just go and give money to everybody, like Social Security does. I'd say that has very little to do with self control either. You've got, let's see, uh, oh yeah, housing regulation. I don't think housing regulation has anything to do with self control that I can think of. You've got government subsidies for education, healthcare. I don't think those have much connection. And then finally, there's the near ban on nuclear power. So I said these are the six things that actually are the most important differences between a free market and the world of today. If you specifically just want to focus on getting rid of paternalism, that then you might think, well, like if you're a libertarian, then you don't need paternalism. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think like probably the actual best argument in favor of paternalism is really just because people really don't want their kids doing bad things to themselves. And so whenever someone says, "Oh, I don't want people in my society smoking marijuana," I'm like, "Yeah, you don't really care." But it's like, "I don't want my kids smoking marijuana." It's like, "All right, yeah, I don't want my kids smoking marijuana either." And the laws we have, like they basically it's a way of saying, well, we're going to reduce the chance that your kid does it. Although if they do get caught, then they could be more severely punished. Um, so, like on average, is this benefit? Is paternalism beneficial or harmful for people that lack self control? It's a tough question. I'm much more open to the idea that paternalism is actually is a net benefit for people with poor self control. Definitely, as a parent, if you say, well, like 5 year olds, it's good to be paternalistic towards them, right? 10 year olds, 15 year olds, 17 year olds, was there some magic thing that happens when you turn 18 where suddenly paternalism doesn't work on you anymore? I don't think so. In terms of like the actual practice, I'd say you really would need to go and look at a lot of specific facts. There are a lot of deep misconceptions about self harm. Like for example, I'm planning on doing a post on this famous series of pieces on heroin addiction in the Vietnam War. Long story short, heroin use was extraordinarily high during the Vietnam War. So I think urine tests showed like 30% of U.S. soldiers were using heroin, or at least other opioids, and I think heroin was by far the most available version in Vietnam. And then the U.S. military got very concerned what's going to happen when these guys go back to the U.S. And the punchline of the story is almost none of them stayed heroin addicts when they got back to the US. They did have some treatment programs, but it didn't seem like it mattered whether or not you had the treatment program. And the punchline is it looks like actual heroin was not nearly as addictive as people thought. Right. And it's like, what about all this other stuff? Well, this was an actual experiment. It's hard to just say it doesn't count for anything. Right. And then another example, which I've been thinking about quite a lot. Right now, my daughter in school is getting a pile of propaganda about how smoking and vaping are terrible. And yet, there is some amazing new research coming out showing that vaping has basically killed smoking among teens. Right. So it's fallen like 75% in just 8 years. Smoking has. And vaping has picked up the slack. And yes, there is very good evidence that vaping is barely dangerous at all. I wouldn't be celebrating if my daughter became a vapor, but I actually wouldn't care very much. And on the other hand, if she was a smoker, that would be terrible because my own daughter would stink. Right? So that would be really bad for me. Besides, I don't want that happening to her. So anyway, this is a case where the paternalists are so arbitrary and innumerate that you can actually get the cure for tobacco to come along, namely vaping, and instead of welcoming it and being happy, they try to fight it. So these people are just not reliable, and yeah, so I don't think of them as actually helping on balance. But to do a good job, you'd have to do it very thoroughly. All right. Then let's see. Is following politics counterproductive and a waste of time for almost all of us? Yes, definitely. And I say there's two different ways of following politics. So there's the current events version where, like, you don't learn very much from current events. In fact, generally people get more confused from watching current events because it takes a mind of steel to watch the news and not go crazy. It is just so relentlessly negative, so relentlessly partisan and biased that to watch it and not have your thinking get completely screwed up, very difficult. Uh, so during COVID, my wife started watching the news, and she's a very sensible person, but she just started repeating things like, I cannot stand to hear this stuff. It's just so innumerate. It's so unrepresentative. It's meaningless. Stop. Um, so now, if you were to say, well, what about like reading Wikipedia articles on policy or reading books? Then again, it's unlikely that you can actually do anything about it. That's just harsh reality. We're all just small individual people, like in a giant world. There's always a chance that you can become a huge influencer, but probably not. I do think that there is just pure intellectual value in understanding the world. I like understanding the world. uh, and especially learning more general principles like anecdotes are not a good source of evidence, especially when they are handpicked to inflame the passions as the news is. So if you so I'd say like if you want to have a deep understanding of the world, human nature, say yeah, sure, read policy, read history. If you just want to go and have a happy life, then yeah, probably you could do it. Yeah, you could definitely do it without learning any of this stuff. If you're curious, if you actually get some satisfaction from understanding, great. But if you are just staring at the news, going, "Oh my God, so terrible," then yeah, it's really bad for you. You should stop. All right. Is increased polarization net good or bad for liberty? With federalism, good. That's something that I thought for a long time, but definitely during COVID. It's like thanks to, so without polarization, basically every state in the U.S. would have had the average, and you would have been stuck. But because of polarization, we had an incredible range of COVID policies, everything from virtual reopening in a month all the way to keeping lockdowns for 2 years, which means you've got the option to just go someplace that is more suitable. And yes, and again, you might think, oh, you can't count on Republicans to do the pro liberty thing. During COVID, the Republican governors, I was just shocked at how libertarian they were. Right, more libertarian than a lot of libertarians that I knew. Right, and that's why I spent about a month of COVID in Florida, about 3 months of COVID in Texas, just to live in a place that was not hell. Right, and Virginia was just terrible during that time. Uh, So, yes, polarization combined with federalism is good. Polarization without federalism, then it's less clear. I mean, I'd say the only thing is if the status quo is just very bad for liberty, then just throwing in some extra randomness is helpful. So, I mean, honestly, with, for example, discrimination law, the way that it has been interpreted in recent decades was so unreasonable, just like Anania says, so basically designed to be the intellectual foundation of wokeness to make and create a world where anyone saying anything that is not politically popular with the left is, by virtue of that fact, is somehow discriminating against people. So that's one where just going and flipping the majority in the Supreme Court and like we're already so close, so maxed out to see what happens. So I think that on that it's going to turn out better, but we shall see. All right. So I'm a woman who's very politically interested and read on it. Even though I'm Canadian, I still inform myself in everything I can. All right, not a question. So yeah, like again, like, you know, if it really actually fulfills you, if you really enjoy it, then nice for you. Uh, it's very hard for me to think of anyone who is really into politics, especially in current events, who's into current events, who is not getting upset about what they're seeing routinely. If you talk to Robin Hanson, he'll say, "Oh, people enjoy being upset." Yeah, I don't think my dad enjoys being upset. He's just upset almost all the time. Colleen, I read David Frum's books, so I'm not conservative nor a Democrat, as I'm Canadian. All right. Let's see. I'm at university. My friends are either not interested in having intellectual conversations or interested but know very little. Do you have any suggestions about what to do? Hmm. All right. Well, of course, step one is to just try to meet a lot of people and then find the subset that actually is interested. So that's step one. Of course, another one is just going to clubs that actually where people share these interests on campus and try that. Another one is trying to meet people online. So that I think honestly, like making friends online, I've heard so much better things about that than online dating. So even though online dating is the much bigger market, and I don't even know of any friend apps, but just the informal process of making friends online, going to meetups. So shout out to Scott Alexander. Almost every major city on earth now has a Scott Alexander meetup group, and anytime I've gone, they're great people. Just love those people. So, like, you go to Tokyo and like 50 Scott Alexander fans show up. So, do things like that to go and make friends. So that's and probably if you live in any major population center, there's a Scott Alexander group right there. And you might think that they will say, "Oh, if Scott isn't the only thing you want to talk about, we don't want to talk to you." And they're just not like that. They're cool people. Uh, let's see. Uh, there is the other thing where if you have people that you're just very friendly with already, people are already really good friends, and you think that they're smart enough where they could get interested in this, that's where I would say you can say, look, please, would you I really just love this book. Would you read it? And I think that is much more likely to work. You start off by being good friends and then ask a favor and then see if they get into it. So Tyler Cowen, he was the first person in his friend group to get into economics when he was like 13 years old. And then he went and got his friends Dan Klein and Randy Krosner into his interest. They didn't care about economics at first, but like he sold them on it. And they also played baseball with Pete Betke, but I think that's a separate story. I don't think Pete got his economics through Tyler. But this is one where you get your friends on board. Um, Fabio Rojas, who I'm doing a podcast with in a few minutes, uh, I met him at UC Berkeley, and we just started talking about this stuff. And so now he's maybe the most prominent libertarian sociologist in the world, which isn't as hard as it sounds, but still, I'm going to take a lot of credit for that. All right. What is the role of envy in society? Yes, the role of envy in society. Good question. Uh, First of all, I'll confess my sins. Yeah, even I feel envy. Yeah, so I know I shouldn't, right? And like often it's actually envy of somebody's kids have something that my kids don't have, right? And I think it's a very natural human reaction. To learn more about it, I really recommend Helmut Schech's book Envy. In terms of the role that it plays in society, there's mundane things like you make enemies by bragging, right? Trump notwithstanding, that's the normal thing that happens when you brag is you make enemies, even maybe especially if your bragging is true, people don't like it. Uh, Also explains why it is not a good idea to be inquiring about how much money other people make because there's a chance they're making less than you and it causes bad blood. It's a reason for trying to go and be tactful about things like this. Uh, but other deeper things. So envy makes it hard for people to go and improve their lives by mimicking success. It's very important to be honest with yourself about who is it who's doing better than me and why, and then how can I go and emulate them. Wise people emulate successful people. You don't really say like it's natural to say why should he have that and you not, and like, but it's like okay, let's really calm down and say yeah, why does he have it? What is he doing differently from me? Is it really just luck? Well, one person might not be enough to study. Let's study a bunch of successful people. What are they doing that I'm not doing? And I think you can learn a lot from mimicking success. Yeah, and then obviously a lot of government policies are motivated by envy. There are many policies where they hurt some people, they don't really help other people, and especially if they're hurting business people and the rich, then it's really hard to get rid of them. So that's especially obvious. And then, finally, the most obvious case of all. So I think communism was very heavily motivated by envy, leads to mass murder, and so Nazism too, like not specifically anti-rich, but against rich Jews, envy of them. Why should they have what they have just because they're so creative and smart? Let's kill them. So yeah, like it's also one that leads to murder at a large scale. All right. Any thoughts on the Invisible Hand comic? Oh yeah. So I did. So I believe this is from Seth, who very kindly sent me this series, and I did read all 4 books. It's a pretty weird story, actually, because basically the plot is there's a kid who finds out that his dad is part of some international society of evil plutocrats, and then he wants to go and blow the lid off of them. But by the end, he discovers that these evil plutocrats, though bad, aren't as bad as just regular national chauvinists and people like that. And so then he winds up joining them, and that's the story. So yeah, it's a pretty weird story. Um, I didn't. It's one where it's odd to go and actually never have much of a discussion about how might it be socially beneficial to have business or anything like that. There's something about how like regular economics is all just a giant smokescreen for the evil that's going on, but they never really explain what that is. So, like it was definitely entertaining enough to hold my interest, and appreciate the gift. Let's see. Turkey PKK developments. I probably know more about this than 99% of Americans, but that's not saying much. Uh, yeah, I've long thought that it was just crazy for the US to be going and antagonizing multiple governments on behalf of the separatist movement, especially one so inspired by Murray Bookchin, uh, the anarcho-environmentalist. Uh, yeah, so like, um, it's one again. It's one where I think it's seems very motivated by like we don't like these governments. Let's go and find some other group that we can go and ally with to go and cause problems for them. And it's one like it's again, it's particularly strange. It's basically we're just going to ally with some really weak people to go and make enemies of some much stronger organizations, and it's going to be so great if there's Kurdish independence. Exactly why, right? Couldn't it be even better if they just calm down and stop worrying about it, right? So, uh, I mean, just understanding the way that by taking the side of the Kurds, the U.S. alienated Turkey. And like, I have not seen the internal memos, but that seems like a lot of what's going on. And it's like, yeah, well, what did you think was going to happen? Right. And it's like, well, like they should just go and do whatever we want. We give them independence. Like, well, hardly any countries do that. So the U.S. didn't do it in the 19th century. Why would Turkey? Right. So, and I do have a piece that I've been planning to write, haven't gotten around to it, just called Diplomacy is Sleaze. And the point of it is, look, all these people are terrible. They're all murderers. They're all horribly power hungry. They're all the kind of people that would burn their countries down to rule the ashes. So it's best if these sleazy people go and talk to each other and work out a compromise than if they actually go through with this plan of burning things down to rule the ashes. Let's see. Do you intend to develop your idea of rationality more? Yes. The book that I'm writing, Unbeatable, The Brutally Honest Case for Free Markets, I think of it as a lot of it is a considerably improved version of Myth of Rational Voter. It's the one where I think I get able to give a lot more content to what is it that people are rational about, using this concept in psychology of social desirability bias. It's one that really does help us to get a better idea about what things exactly do people are irrational about. What are the specific irrational views that appeal to people and don't? So I've been blogging about it a bit, and I'm going to be doing more. I think that book I think I'll be done by the end of the summer, and then it's going to be University Press Books. So that means probably another year before it gets out. But yes, there's a lot more coming, and I'm happy with it. Do you believe there are systematic institutional structures that embed racism or sexism in our society? So, what can be done about it? So, taken literally, I'll say that civil rights law is a systematic institutional structure that embeds anti-white and anti-Asian racism in our society. And same thing with anti-male sexism through discrimination laws. So, I think that is actually genuine. Uh, Precisely because it's enforced by government, it is very stable, and you got to change the laws if you really want to change the system. In terms of the normal interpretation of this question, which is, well, isn't just the whole way that our society is set up unfair to non-white, non-Asian, non-males? Then I'd say, yeah, no. I think it's actually the opposite. Uh, Again, unless, of course, if you're willing to say, look, I have a standard where the failure to go and give 90% of your free time and money to total strangers to help them counts as a structure, right? And it's like, so again, you could say, well, like the fact that I'll stay home and watch Netflix and take a walk with my kids instead of going and tutoring disadvantaged youth, is that a structural thing? And I'm like, all right, if you're gonna raise the bar that high, then fine, but it's crazy to have the bar be that high. All right. So, what's your opinion about present usefulness and future promises of cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance? Right. So, first of all, you shouldn't take what I have to say about this very seriously because when crypto first came out, I heard about it very early on and I thought it was crazy and would never work. So, don't believe what I say. I'm not reliable. I met some college kids with shirts on around 2009 saying, I use coins, Bitcoins. And to me, they were about as likely to succeed as the kind of person who says, I'm going to start a new country on an island somewhere. And then it turned out to be what, like $1 trillion market. So I just totally missed that. Uh, I've done some remedial education since. I'm still very puzzled about how it got started or how it got off the ground. Once it exists, though, once people explain, well, a lot of the reason that people want to use crypto is for black market transactions and avoiding taxation. I'm like, okay. Now I see why. Now I see why it makes sense. It's not just something where there's no actual practical reason for it. I was actually a student of Ken Rogoff, who has a well-known book advocating the abolition of cash, precisely because cash allows for the continuation, or it makes it a lot easier anyway for black markets to exist. And I think it's a very good book, except that he just can't imagine that someone could be pro-black markets. And I think black markets are generally really good, and we want more of them and make it easier. So that's why I'm pro-crypto. But in terms of forecast, I mean, you all probably seen the meme of the girl spitting when is it the girl or the guy spitting? Anyway, spitting when they hear about the current price of Bitcoin. It's done amazingly well, and at this point, I think it's totally here to stay. Uh, right, I'm kind of amazed that governments didn't ban it either. All right. Given the societal benefits of stable families, I think government should play a role in encouraging family formation, discouraging family dissolution. Uh, yeah, so. I mean, step one, of course, is they can play a role by no longer discouraging it. Right? This is a classic critique of the welfare state, and I think it's a reasonable one. I also think that a policy where you give large large tax reductions to people in the year where they have kids. So I've said, how about you get a tax holiday any year that you have a new baby? I think that would be a really good idea. In terms of governments explicitly encouraging it, yeah, first of all, I would just say this seems very unrealistic because most government involvement in this is obviously going to be through public education. And I think the people involved are much more likely to be promoting anti family values. And again, secondly, it's the kind of thing once you put it in the hands of government, I think it's going to be used poorly. Um, but not totally sure about that, but seems likely. All right. I think gentrification is good or bad. I want free markets for housing. What is to be done about folks getting priced out of their neighborhoods? All right. Yeah, great question. So there's a great term to Google or maybe Google Scholar, and this is housing filtering. Right? And this is a very simple point. It's like, so you go and you build a bunch of new luxury apartments in San Francisco. All right. And then who moves in? Rich people. So only rich people gain, right? Wrong, because where do those rich people come from? They came from other places, and now those places are vacant. And then who's going to move into those? Probably some poor people. And those people are vacating their places. Who's going to move into those? Even poor people. There is a great chain, and building anything winds up indirectly affecting everything and not in a small way. There's a lot of good evidence on this. And actually, you don't even need to really read the academic research. You can just take a look at when is the lower quality housing built. Take a look at the homes that the poor live in. They're old. And when they were first built, they weren't for the poor. It's the normal process is that when things are built, they're initially nice and rich people live in nice things. And then over time, things tend to deteriorate. And then the rich people move to some other place that's new and nice. And then people aren't as rich move in. And this is a standard way that markets work. And it's a way that the benefits of housing deregulation get enjoyed by everyone. Okay, have you read Tyranny by Timothy Snyder? I flipped the pages, but I haven't read the whole thing. I'm a big fan of Timothy Snyder's Bloodlands. Uh, I think he shares the problems of almost all people who are into current foreign policy of forgetting most of what they actually know about history and thinking that they have perfect foresight when they don't. Right. So like if he were to say something like 50% chance that standing up to Russia will improve things, 30% chance it makes no difference, 20% chance it makes things worse. If he said that, I would instantly give him a lot of credibility because that is what a reasonable person would definitely say. Anyone who says things like the only effect of appeasing Russia can be further Russian expansionism, yeah, that's just wrong. If you know history, you realize that it is not true that a policy of maximum aggressiveness always works. Far from it. Right. And even if you think that another country is crazy to feel threatened, and I do think the Russians are crazy to feel threatened, it does not follow that if you do things to make them feel less threatened, it will not actually reduce their aggressiveness. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Holding Russia's action roughly constant. What do you think U.S. policy should have been regarding U.S. Ukraine war? What do you think Ukraine's policy should have been? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so this is one again. I'll say my knowledge is at least the 99th percentile of an American, but that's not very good. So I'm not going to put a lot of weight on this. So the general point of if Russia were to go and to try to get really friendly with Mexico, the U.S. would get very upset. I think that's obviously true. And to go and flip it around and say Russia understandably got very upset by the U.S. trying to get really friendly with Ukraine, I think that's a reasonable comparison. Right now, you can say yes, but Russia goes and does terrible things to countries that it's friends with, and the U.S. does nice things to countries that it's friends with, and yeah, that's pretty true too. But still, if you are trying to go and predict what is the likely reaction if we try to befriend this country that they have long regarded as central to their national self-interest, silly as that whole idea is, um, are they likely to respond very negatively? Then I think the answer is yes. So not so surprising that what happened happened. Although, again, like total honesty, I still, even when the Russians were invading eastern Ukraine in 2022, my preferred forecast was just that they would just go and annex the part that they already had and then stop, like they had done with Crimea earlier. And that, of course, turned out to be totally wrong. Uh, what should have been done? Yeah, I think that uh, it would have been very wise for both the U.S. and Ukraine to say yes, we definitely are not going to have Ukraine join NATO. Well, we can tell this is really upsetting to you. We don't want to be upset. We don't want to upset you, and we won't do it. And try it. Would that have worked? Like 30% chance it would have worked, and that's a great chance to avert a conflict, right? And in the end, it's going to turn out that there'll probably be a promise of Ukraine not to join NATO anyway, uh, which itself is like, like, and then what happens when Putin dies? Yeah, maybe that promise will be forgotten. So who knows? All right. Okay, so in 3 minutes, I should check out about. So read How to Kill a City. All right, thank you. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Is there? No. Let's see. Oh, I see. So if I do this, it goes right down to the bottom. All right. Let's see. I think there's anything good about nationalism. Let's see. On average, no. Particular cases, so like I think it was crucial for like getting the Baltics liberated from the Soviet Union, and I think that's a big improvement. I think normally it leads to bad things, but not in every case. Let's see. To use Metaculus. Very rarely. I'm just really busy and focused on getting my projects done. And normally I just free ride off my friends to tell me what's going on in the broader world. Let's see. What else? Let's see here. Understand black markets. Let's see. It's the reality of democracy ruled by the elite, as Michael said. I'm a big fan of Michael's. Uh, what I would say is that, of course, in like directly, the proximate rulers are the elite. But in a democracy, how do you stay on top? Definitely, you don't get on top by saying the opposite of what regular people think and doing the opposite of what regular people want. There is, excuse me, some wiggle room. Um, but what I'd say is it is unusual for status quo policy to be really unpopular on any topic that people actually care about. So, in that sense, rulers do have a a lot. Their flexibility is limited, although there's a lot of margins where they can just get away with it, and people will either say, "All right, whatever, I don't care," or they'll say, "Well, it's still close enough." Excuse me. uh, let's see. What are your views on the justification for property rights, except Locke and proviso? Excuse me. I was almost over a cough. I've been talking too much. Let's see. Um, I would say here, like I'm really just relying on your basic Robinson Crusoe intuition. You show up in an area other people are not, and you can go and start appropriating stuff. Uh, if it's a small island and there's no one else there, can you take the entire island? Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. Locking proviso, strictly speaking, says you have to leave it enough is good for others. There is what economists call a backwards induction argument of, well, if when the last person takes some, there isn't enough for others, then the second to last person can't take any, and the third to the last person can't take any. So I think that's pretty crazy. I do uh, like accept the insight of this Nozick hypothetical where he says, if you pour a can of tomato juice in the ocean, do you acquire ownership of the ocean or do you lose your tomato juice? And I'll say, yeah, you just lost your tomato juice. You've got to do more than have like a 1 in quadrillion change in order to reasonably claim ownership. But yeah, I don't have anything deeper than that. All right, and let's see here. All right, we'll do one last question, and then I'll bow out. What science fiction films or series do you think most accurately depict what life will be like in 50 or 100 years? Oh, totally Star Wars. No. Let's see. Are there any that seem even remotely believable? I mean, honestly, the ones that are most believable are that are specifically believable are like your post-nuclear Holocaust ones, because that's got to be like a 10% chance for the next 100 years is we'll just have some horrible nuclear exchange. Even though it's bad for all sides, still human beings are impulsive and like there's just bad people, and so and why those? Well, because there's just a lot less variation in what can happen there. In terms of the optimistic scenarios, let's see. Hmm. Like ones where, so like, let's see. So like ones where we're doing gene selection to go and get better kids. I think the specific Gattaca story is kind of crazy, but the general idea makes sense. And again, anything involving life extension, I think we're going to slowly move up in life extension. So any movies that are like that. But there's no one movie that really springs to mind as actually being a good description of a like a mid-tier scenario. All right, everybody. So this is awesome. So I got over 200 people on. That's way more than I normally get on my Zoom. So I think I'll try this again. And sorry if I didn't get to your question. I will be doing a written AMA next week for where everyone can read it, but only subscribers can write questions. So if you didn't get your question answered today and you're burning, I suppose you could subscribe. You could just do the really cheap one for a month and then get your question in. All right. So goodbye, everybody. And it's only Thursday, but everybody have a great weekend and talk to you later. Thank you. Bye bye.